Hello guys and welcome back to my YouTube. So in this video we are going to continue with our food delivery application. Now in this video we are going to be working with the authentication, right? We'll be implementing Firebase authentication with email and password, right? So one thing that we need to do before we do that, we need to work on our folder structure, right? So on our folder structure, what we need is we need a core, right? And then the other one that we need is we need the feature. We need the features folder. Inside the features folder, we need the authentication. So I'll just call it auth. So inside the auth folder, we need the repository. We need the repository. We also need the models folder, right? Also need the model. And then we also need the controllers folder. So I'll just call it controller. And then the other thing that we need is we need the screen folder, right? The screen folder, and that's it. And then inside our core folder, right, what we need to create a couple of files, right? So the first thing that we need is we need a failure.dat file. So the failure.dat file, we use it when we are displaying error messages from Firebase, right? So let's just create a class called failure. It's going to take in a string. And then we'll then pass this string inside our constructor. All right. And then the next thing that we need is type defs, right? Type definition, right? So let's just create it, type defs.dat. Okay. So in the types def folder, what we need is we need these packages. So I've already put like the starter code right inside the description. You just copy this starter code repository, and then you can just clone it with all the packages. We already have all the packages, right? So the package that we'll be using is this one, fp.dat, right? So let's create a type definition of future either. Of type T, right? Which is going to be a future, which is going to give us either the type either, and then a failure, and then T, right? Like this. So I'll explain it in a few seconds. And then we also need a type def of type future void, which is equal to future either of type void, right? So let's just import the fp.dat package, right? Let's import the fp.dat package, and also let's import the failure class, right? And then I'll explain in a bit. So we are setting this future either, which is of type T, to be equal to future of type either. So in either takes in either it takes in a left or right, right? So what we'll be using this, so that when we are getting our data from Firebase data, so we are going to be using the left side to represent failure, right? You know that when you are getting data from a service or an API, there is either a failure or a success. So we want to represent the left side as failure, and then the right side we want to represent it as success. So if we are getting a success, it's going to be represented on the right side, right? So that's basically it with with either, right? So now what we need to do is we need to go and then we need to start working on the repository, right? We need to start working on the repository. So before we even start working on the repository, there's one thing that we forgot to do, right? So let's go inside our main.dat file. If you go inside your main.dat file, right, inside the main function, we want to change it to async, right? And then we want to call our widgets Flutter binding, right? Widgets Flutter binding dot ensure initialized, right? So we need to make sure that widgets Flutter binding is initialized, right? And then the other thing that we want to do is we want to await Firebase dot initialize, right? So let's import Firebase it's going to come from Firebase core, right? Dot initialize app. We want to initialize our Firebase application, and then we provide you with the options. Now the options are going to be default. It's going to be default Firebase options, right? Default Firebase options dot current platform, right? So the current platform will depend if it's Android or what. It will determine automatically if it's Android or it's what, or it's iOS, right? So we've just initialized our Firebase. Because if you don't do this, you get an error when we want to use what? The authentication, right? So now let's move on to dealing with our authentication, right? So let's move into our features folder, auth, and then repository. So I'm just going to create a file that I'm going to call auth repository. It's going to be auth repository.dat file, right? Auth repository.dat file. So it's going to be a class of auth repository, right? It's going to be class of auth repository. So in this class, what we need is we need a Firebase Firestore, right? Firebase Firestore, which we are going to just initialize as Firestore. We'll also need a Firebase auth, so we are going to initialize it. Firebase, not Firebase app. We need Firebase auth, right? Which is going to be Firebase auth. And then we also need like Firebase. We also need Firebase storage, right? Firebase storage, which is going to be also Firebase storage, like this. So these are the three things that we need: Firebase Firestore, Firebase auth, and then Firebase storage, right? So now the next thing that we need to do now is now to create a constructor. So the constructor is going to be auth repository, right? Auth repository, and then you just need to set required Firebase Firestore, which is Firestore. Let's just call it Firestore. Right, the next thing that we need is we also need Firebase auth, which is Firebase auth. Firebase auth. The next thing that we need is Firebase storage. Which is going to be Firebase storage, right? Okay, now we are done with the constructor. Now let's set this initialized file values to Firebase story, Firebase Firestore. We want to set it to Firestore, and then Firebase auth, we want to set it to Firebase auth, and then Firebase storage, we want to set it to Firebase storage, right? Like this. Now that we are done with it, now we need our collection reference, right? So this collection reference is going to be a reference to our collection in our Firebase Firestore, right? So we are going to create a getter, which is going to be users, and then it's going to be Firebase Firestore dot collection, right? So now the collection is going to be, so what we need to do, let's go inside our core, right? Okay, let's create a utils folder, right? Let's create utils folder, and then let's create a file called Firebase constants. Firebase constants .dat. So now let's create the class Firebase constants. Firebase constants. Now in the Firebase constants, what we need to do is we need to create like the users collection. So I'm just going to say static constant users collection is equals to users, right? Because we don't want to keep on repeating this, so that's why I created this file. So now what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to call up on Firebase constants, our class that we created, Firebase constants dot users collection, like this, right? Now that we are done, let's move on to the next thing, which is getting like the auth state, right? So let's create a stream which takes in the user. So that means that the user that is logged in our Firebase, right? Get auth state change. So we want to get the auth state change. So basically the auth state change will tell us if a user is logged in or not, right? So it's a getter. So we are just going to call in Firebase authentication dot get dot auth state changes, right? So this will monitor if there is any auth state change, right? Okay, so now the next thing that we need to do is we need to create our user model, right? We need to create our user model. So to create our user model, let's just first initialize user model and then underscore user model like this, right? And then if we go inside our model, let's create our user model.dat file. So now we are going to be using Freest package for creating this user model, right? So it's a code generation package, right? So what we need to do is we create an abstract class. We create an abstract class which we are going to call user model, and then which is going to be with underscore $ user model, right? And then we need to create now our constructor. So our constructor is fxtree user model, and then what we need is we need a UID, which is required string UID, right? The next thing that we need is a username. The next thing that we need is the profile image, right? Right, and then the next thing that we'll need is, okay, so like this, it's now okay. And then we just need to set it to underscore user model. like this, right? Now what we need to do is we need to create another method factory, user model dot from JSON, right? From JSON. So this method is going to deserialize our data from Firebase Firestore, right? And then it's going to be string and then dynamic. And then it's going to be a JSON. And then we are just going to say underscore $sign user model dot from JSON. Sorry, it's supposed to be user model from JSON. And then we just set it to JSON like this. Right, so now that we are done, we just need to take care of a few things at the top there. So now you need to create a file, a part file. The part file is going to be user underscore model. So make sure that this user model is the same as the file name, right? If it's not same as the file name, we'll get an error. So dot freezed and then dot dat, like this, right? And then the next one is going to be part and then user model dot g and then dot dat, like this, right? And then the next thing that we need is we need to annotate this whole thing with freezed, right? We need to annotate it with freezed, right? So the freeze package, now I'll just copy it. You need to import freezed for it to work, right? So this is freezed here. You need to import freezed for the annotation to work, right? Now to generate the files, now we need to use this command right here. This command, flutter pub run build runner build delete conflicting outputs. So I'll put it in the description below, right? So if you run this command, so now if you run this command, you will see that the freeze package was able to generate these 4 folders for us, right? Now we don't need to like know what's going on in there. It generated this for us, right? So it will allow us to get like data from Firestore, JSON data from Firestore. Now what we need to just do here is just to import our user model, right? And then the next thing, now we need to create a function for signing in user with email and password. So this function is going to be a future of type either, right? A future of type either. It's going to take in the user model. Well, it's going to be of type user model. So it's going to be sign in with email and password. Sign in with email and password, right? And then it's going to have like 2 parameters, a string of type email and then a string of type password, like this. And then the other thing is this needs to be an async function, like this, right? Needs to be an async function. And then we are going to create what we call a try catch block, right? So inside our try block, what we are just going to do is we are just going to await Firebase auth, right? We are going to await Firebase auth dot sign in with email and password, right? Await Firebase auth, sign in with email and password. We are just going to pass in the email and then the password, right? Like this, right? And then if this is successful, what we want to do now is we are just going to return right. Remember I told you about feature either, that we are going to represent the left side for an error, and then the right side is going to represent the success, right? So if it's successful, we want to get the user model data, right? We just want to return the user model. For the UID now, we need to pass in Firebase auth.current-user.uid, right? Which is their unique ID, right? So this UID can be nullable, so that's why we just have to put this nullable, right? And then if there's an error now, we just need to catch that error. We just catch that error, right? And then we are just going to return left. Remember I said that left is going left is just going to represent if we have an error, and then we'll then pass in our failure, right? Then we'll pass in our failure message. It's going to e.toString, right? The message is going to be e.toString, like this, right? So now we are done with this sign in with email and password. Now what we need to do is now we need to move on to create with email and password, right? So to create with email and password, I'm just going to do is future either, right? Future either. It's going to take in the user model also. It's going to be of type user model, and then we also need a string email and then password. It's also going to be an async function, right? And then we'll use a try catch block. So it's going to be Firebase. It's going to be Firebase auth.create user with email and password, right? So here it was a mistake. So it's going to be Firebase auth.create email with user and password, and then we are just going to pass in a then. So this then now is going to be the user credential, right? It's going to be the user credential, and then it's also going to be an async. It's going to be an async what? It's going to be an async function, right? And then what we are going to do is we are going to check now if the user, we are going to check if the user credential, right? We are going to check if the user credential dot additional information or additional user information, and then dot is new user, right? So we are going to check if the user is new, right? So if this user is new, what we are going to do is we are going to just set in the user model that we created here. We had not initialized it, right? So we are going to set it here, right? We are going to set it to user model. And then the UID. So it's saying that user model isn't a function. So must set it is equal to user model. So the UID is going to be Firebase auth.current-user, right, .uid, like this, see, like this, right? Now it's telling us that the user model is not a function, so there must be a typo somewhere. Let's check. so let's check how we initialize user model. User model isn't used. Okay, so what we can basically do is let's just remove this user model here, and then we can just say user model. User model is equal to user model. Don't know why we are getting an error here. Okay, and then if we are going to await the users collection .doc, the document, right? Now we want to set this document to be, set it to be the user's UID, right? Current user.uid, like this. And then we want to set the data. So we want to set the data to be user model.json. Yeah, we want to set it to be user model.json. It's supposed to be user model.json, but we are getting an error. Let me check why we are getting an error. Future either isn't the lowercase. Okay, I see what it's supposed to be. Sign up with email, password. That's why you are getting this error here. Sign up with email and password, right? So it's going to be to JSON, right? Like this. Now that we are done with that, else, right? So else, what we just need to do. So else, that means that the user already has an account. So what we just need to do is just set in the user, right? Let's just copy this right there. Let's copy that, and then let's put it outside here. And then let's make sure it's late, because we want to initialize it later on, right? So if we go back, we're just going to say that the user model is equal to await. That means if the user already has an account, get user data. So this is the function for getting the user data, right? Which is going to be user credential dot user dot uid, right? And then dot first. Dot first, like this, right? And then if everything is successful, right, what we want to do is if everything is successful, we want to return, right? So that means everything is successful. If everything is successful, we want to return the user information, that is the user model that we are using, which is going to be Firebase auth dot current user, which can be nullable dot uid, like this, right? And then catch. Want to catch an error, right? Want to catch an error. So to catch an error, we just return left, and then failure, and then message. The message is going to e.toString, right, like this, right. So now that we are done with this, what we need to do is now we need to create the get user data information. But before we do that, let's create the sign out method, right? So we used this to sign out the user from the application. Sign out. It's going to be an async function, right? So with the sign out, it's just easy. We just await Firebase auth dot sign out, right? It's easy. And then to get the user information, we'll get it using a stream, right? A stream which is going to be of type user model, and then get user ID. Since the user's collection, each document is the user's UID, right? We need to pass in the UID, right? And then what we'll do is we just return users dot document, right? The document, and then UID, and then we need to get like the snapshots, right, from the user, and then we're just going to map those snapshots, right? We're just going to map those snapshots. We are going to map them into user model dot from JSON, right? From JSON, then event dot data, that is the data that we're getting, right? From dot data as we want the data to be of type map, string, and then dynamic, right? So that's it on getting like the user information, right? As you can see, get user, okay, it's supposed to be get user data, right? As you can see now, we have this get user data there. And then the last function that we need right now is for updating the user information. So to update the user information is going to be of type either, and then dynamic, and then a type of future, right? A type of future of type void, and then we are going to call it the method update user data, right? And then user model, and then user, and then what we are going to do is we need the user ID, right? So I'm just going to say final user ID is equals to Firebase auth dot current user dot UID, right? Dot UID, like this, right? And then what we are just going to do is we are just going to create a try catch block, right? So inside our try catch block, we are just going, if we are going to just return right, and then users dot doc, right? The document that we want to update, which is of type user ID dot, and then update. I want to update. So to update it, it's going to be user dot to JSON, right? The data that we have to JSON, right? And then if it happens that we have an error, right? So what I'm just going to do is we need to catch if there is a Firebase exception, right? Firebase exception. We are just going to catch that exception, right? Just going to catch that exception, and then we are just going to throw an e.message, right? and then we are just going to catch the error, right? And then we're just going to return left and then failure, which is going to be e.toString, right? Like this, right? So basically that's authentication in a nutshell, right? So let's talk about it. So here we created like a collection reference that allows us to reference the user's collection, right? Remember, in Firebase Firestore, we store data in collections, right? And then inside the collection, there are also documents, right? And then we also have this stream that is going to get like the auth state change. So what is the auth state change? So the auth state change monitors if our user is logged in or if he's logged out. For example, if the user presses like the logout button, this auth state change is going to monitor that, right? And then we let initialize our user model, right? And then we create this method of type future either, sign in with email and password, which takes in the email and then the password, right? And then we use a try catch block, and then we await Firebase authentication dot sign in with email and password. We then pass in the email and then the password, right? And then if it's a success, we are just going to return the user model with the user's user ID, right? We are going to just return the user model with the user ID, right? If there is an error, we are going to just display this failure, right? The same goes on for the sign up with email and password, right? Which is of type user model. It takes in a string of email and then also password. Then we are going to use a Firebase create user. Now we are creating a new user with email and password, right? And then we'll then use this callback function, the then, right? This then function, which takes in like a user credential, right? So the user credential just has like the user's information, right? And then inside this then function, we are just going to check if the user credential dot additional information is new user. So we are going to check if the user has already registered with us before or not. So if they are not registered, what we are just going to do is we are just going to get their user ID, and then we are just going to get their user ID, and then inside the user model, and then we are just going to save their user ID inside the user's documentation, right? By using this users.doc, and then we are going to users.doc, which is like the document, is going to be set to the user's user ID, right? And then we are just going to set the user model with the UID. Else, what we are just going to do is we are just going to get the user data. That means that they have already registered with us, so we are just going to get their data, right? And then if everything is okay, right, we are just going to return this right, which represents success with our user model that contains the UID. And then else, we are just going to want to represent the failure, which is going to be e.toString. And then we have this sign out method right here. This sign out method, we are going to just await Firebase auth.sign out, right? And then we have a stream to get the user ID, which takes in the UID, and then it's just going to return the user's collection and then the document, which is a UID, and then the snapshots, right, which contain the data. And then we're just going to map every field, right, inside our document to user model, to our user model, right? And then we are going to make sure that the data is going to be of map string, of type string, and then dynamic, right? And then we have the update user, right? So the update user, which is of type either, which is going to just update the user information, right? First, we need to get the user ID, right? And then we are going to just, if it's a success, we are going to return, right, the user's collection document. The document takes in the user ID. Then we are just going to update. We're just going to update the user.toJSON, right? Converting this user model to a JSON, which is going to be saved in our Firestore database. If there's a Firebase exception, we are going to throw this error.message. Otherwise, we are just going to want to display this failure right here, right? So now the next thing that we need to do now is we need to take care of this auth repository, right? Because we want it to be accessible inside our controllers folder, right? So what we need to do first is we need to go to our main.dat file. So inside our main.dat file, what we need to do is we need to wrap it, right, with a what? We need to wrap it with a provider scope, right? Provider scope, right? Let's wrap it with a provider scope, and then just make sure that you add a constant, right? So you might be wondering, what's a provider scope, right? So as you know, Flutter is a widget-based framework, right? So that means that we have the parent widget, and then we have the child widgets, right? So the parent might have children, right? So in this case, with our Flutter application, my app is the parent widget. So if we wrap it with our provider scope, right, that means that if we want to access any provider, any data using Riverpod, right, there's no need for us to pass that data from the parent widget to another child, to another child, to another child, right? If we pass it, if we wrap this my app widget, that means that we can access any provider, any Riverpod provider anyway inside our widget tree, right? Which is the good thing about the provider scope, right? So now that we have wrapped it with the provider scope, right, what we need to do now is we need to create a folder called providers, right? We need to create a folder called providers. So inside our lib folder, just click the lib folder and then providers, right? So we're just going to call it Firebase providers. So Firebase is these providers are going to act like as a dependency injection, right? So you'll find that we have not yet initialized like Firebase Firestore. So I'm just going to say Firebase Firestore provider is going to be of type, provider, right? Provider, which is going to take in a reference, right? And then the reference is going to be Firebase Firestore, right? We are just initializing Firebase Firestore.instance. So we are creating this instance of Firebase Firestore. So that means that in each of our repositories, there is no need for us to be instantiating Firebase Firestore, as we already have it here. So I'm just going to paste it below here, and then I'm just going to change this one to Firebase Auth provider, right? So let's change it to Firebase Auth provider, and then just make sure that here you change it to Firebase Auth.instance, right? Firebase Auth, and then let's just initialize it. Let's just import it, right? And then I'm just going to copy it also and then paste it below. So here we also need Firebase storage provider, right? Because we're going to also need the storage, right? So just change this to Firebase storage, right? Firebase storage.instance. So let's import Firebase storage, right? So now that we are done, let's go back to our repository, right? So we are going to create the auth repository provider, right? Auth repository provider, as you can see, auth repository provider, right? And then which is equal to provider, right? So one thing you need to know when creating Riverpod providers, right, is you create them using the final keyword. So it's supposed to be final and then the name of the provider. So in this case, it's the auth repository provider, right? And then which is of type auth repository. So if you use auth repository, you can see that it needs Firestore, Firebase Auth, and then Firebase storage. So instead of like doing this Firebase Firestore.instance like this, which is not efficient because we have to repeat ourselves, right? We can just use Riverpod as a dependency injection. So we just say reference.watch. So this watch provider allows us to obtain the state of a provider. So which provider are we watching? So we are watching this provider right here. We're watching the Firebase Firestore provider, right? So I'm just going to say Firestore, Firebase, as you can see, Firebase, Firestore provider, like this. And then we also need to watch the Firebase auth provider, Firebase auth provider. And then we also need to watch the Firebase storage provider, right? So reference .watch Firebase storage provider, like this, right? And then if let's save like this, you can see now we have our Firebase auth repository provider. Our Firebase auth repository provider, which is equal to provider, which is equal to auth repository. Firebase Firestore, we just use dependency injection, reference.watch Firebase Firestore provider, and then Firebase auth provider. So even if we create, like, let's say for example the menu repository, right, we'll just be reusing these providers, right, which makes it clean and efficient, right? Now we need to move on to the controller, and then we'll then move on to the user interface, right? Okay guys, so let's continue with our controller, right? So if we move into our controller, we need to create a file called auth controller, right? The file needs to be called auth controller.dat, right? So basically this is going to be like our architecture, right? We have the repository, and then we have the controller, and then we have the user interface, right? So basically what the controller does is going to request updates from the repository which is going to be connected to Firebase, right? And then when it requests the updates from the repository is going to publish those updates to the controller, and then the controller is going to update that UI state, right? It's going to emit like the UI state, and then this UI state is going to cause the user interface to change, right? So what happens with the user interface is that if a user, let's say, clicks a button, that is an event. The event will trigger the controller to request for updates, right? And then when it requests for updates, the repository is just going to send back those updates, and then when the controller gets those updates, it's just going to update the UI state, and then the UI state will then cause the user interface to change, right? So that's basically what our architecture is, right? So now let's go into our auth controller, and let's begin creating the code. So we'll create a class called auth controller, right? So this auth controller is going to extend async notifier, right? Async notifier. It's going to extend async notifier from riverpod, right? Which is going to take in an async value, which is of type void, right? So this async value is not going to return anything. So basically that's it, right? And then the next thing that we need to do is we need to make sure that we initialize the auth repository, right? Initialize the auth repository, which is going to be underscore auth repository. And then we also need to initialize the storage repository, which we are going to create in a moment. Storage repository, right? So now with a async notifier, it's slightly different from the state notifier. If you watch my previous riverpod Flutter e-commerce series, right? So now here we don't need a constructor. What we need is we are just going to provide an async value, right? An async value method of type void, and then the method is going to be a big build, right? So now what this does is it allows us to even use reference object inside our build method, right? So I'm just going to initialize our auth repository, which is equal to reference.watch. So we are going to set this auth repository to reference.watch, auth repository provider, right? Auth repository provider, if you still remember, this is the auth repository provider from our auth repository, right? Auth repository provider. And then the next thing is we need to set the storage repository provider to our storage repository, right? So what we need to do now is we need to go inside, we need to create the storage repository, right? So inside core, right, I'm just going to create a file called repository. And then in this repository, I'm just going to create a file called storage repository. .dat, right? I'm just going to create a file called storage repository.dat. So inside that storage repository, we are just going to create a class called storage repository. So this class storage repository, right? So what this class requires, it requires us to have to initialize the Firebase storage. And then we need to set the constructor. So it should be Firebase storage. And then we just need to set that Firebase storage to Firebase storage. And then we need to create a method of type future either. And then this method is going to return a string. So the name of the method is going to be store file, right? Which will allow us to store a file into cloud storage, right? Store file. So it's going to be required string path, which is the path of the file, and then we need required string ID, right? And then we also need required string file, which is of type nullable file, right? So for the file we need to import that .io, right? So this function is going to be an asynchronous function, right? So let's just make sure that we import .io. Then let's first import future either. So let's import type defs, and then let's import the file. So for the file we just need to import .io, right? So I'm just going to bring it, and then I'm just going to paste it, right, like this. So this is not supposed to be string, right? Let's just leave it like that. It's supposed to be file, right? And then we need to wrap this piece of code into a try catch block. So now we need a reference, the reference to our Firebase bucket storage, right? So it's going to be Firebase storage dot reference, and then the child, right? which takes in the path, and then the child also, which is going to take in the ID. So the way we are going to save it, we are going to save the user reference and then the path, which is the file path, and then we are just going to use the user's ID, right? And then we need an upload task. So this upload task class allows us to upload a piece of file into Firebase cloud storage, right? And then we need a snapshot. So this snapshot is equal to await upload task, right? Like this. So I forgot, the upload task must be equal to reference.put file, right? So this put file allows us like to upload data to file storage, right? And then as you can remember, our file can be nullable, so we need to put the nullable right there. So if the task is successful, we are just going to return right. Then let's import fp.dat package, right? And then we are just going to return await. We're just going to return the snapshot reference .get download URL, right? .get download URL like this, right? And then if we have an error, we are just going to catch that exception, right? So to catch that exception, we just need to return left and then failure and then e.toString, right? Just need to pass in e.toString like this, right? So now we need to, before we move on to the auth controller, we also need storage repository provider, storage repository provider, which is going to be equal to provider, right? So let's import Flutter riverpod. So let's import Flutter riverpod, which takes in a parameter reference, and then it's just going to return the storage repository class. Storage repository. As you can see, the storage repository now needs a Firebase storage. So if you can remember from the providers that we created, we have this Firebase storage provider. So we are just going to watch that. Firebase storage provider. So one thing I forgot to mention is that with riverpod, it allows us to watch for other providers. So what this watch method does, it allows us to watch the provider, and then if the state of that provider changes, right, it will allow us even to watch any state changes into that provider. For example, inside the Firebase providers, if there is a state change inside this Firebase storage.instance, since we are watching it using the reference to watch, it will automatically update. That's one of the advantages of using Flutter riverpod. Okay. So now for storage repository, I'm just going to set the storage repository to be equal to reference.watch storage repository provider, right? Storage repository provider, right? And then what we need to do after this is we need to return an async value. We need to return an async value. So we just need to return constant async value, async data, right? So the async data, and then we just pass in null, right? Since our async value is of type void, right? So we are done with this. Now what we need to do after this is we need to get the user information, right? We need to get the user information. So what we need is we need to create a method for signing in the user. The method is going to be a void, and then sign in with email and password, right? It's going to take in the email and then the password. like this, right? And then we're going to set the user. The user is go to await, and then auth repository dot sign in with email and password, right? Auth repository dot sign in with email and password, like this, right? And then we need to take care of that. We're just going to say user.fold, right? So user.fold, and then on the left side, if you still remember, I said that the left side is going to represent if there is a failure, right? So if there is a failure, that means that if there is an error, right, what we are just going to do is we are just going to display a scaffold. We're just going to display a snake bar, right? So a snake bar is a scaffold messenger. The scaffold messenger dot off, right? And then it's supposed to be context. Scaffold messenger dot off context. And then so here we need a build context, right? Build context, which is going to be context, right? Scaffold messenger dot off context, and then dot show snake bar, right? So we need to show the snake bar, and then we just provide the snake bar, and then the content is going to be a text. And then the text, we are going to provide a failure.message, right? The message that's going to be displayed, right? And then let's copy this snake bar right here. And then on the right side, that means that we have a success. But what are we going to return if we get a success? We are going to return the user model, right? We are just going to return the user model. And then what I'm just going to do is we are just going to say reference.read, right? We are just going to read the user provider, right? So let's create that user provider, right? User provider. Let's create that user provider at the top there. So final user provider is equals to state provider, right? So state provider allows us to change the value of change the state of a particular value. Like in this case, we are going to change the state of the user model, right? And then initially the state of the user model is going to be null. So let's import user model, right? And then reference, which is going to be null. So initially that value is going to be null, right? The value of the user. But we are going to update it, right? Since when the user signs in, we are going to return the user model, right? So what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to say user model dot notify, right? User model. Then we are going to watch the user provider, right? User provider dot notify, right? Dot notify. And then we are just going to update that state, right? Since the state was null, we just need to update it to the user model that's being returned from Firebase. User model. Like this, right? User model is supposed to be user model like this, right? So the next method that we need to create is the sign up with email and password. So the sign up with email and password is also similar to the sign in with email and password. So what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to copy this method right here. I'm just going to copy it, and then I'm just going to paste it below, and then I'm just going to change it to sign up with email and password. And then let's change also here to sign up with email and password, right? And then everything else is similar, right? And then the other method that we need right now is the sign out method. So it's going to be of type void sign out, which is going to be an async method, right? So in this method, what we are just going to do is auth repository.sign out, right, like this. The next method that we need is the get user data, right? User model, and then get user data, which is going to take in a UID, right? And then we are just going to return auth repository.get user data, like this, right? And then the last method now is the update user, right? So void update user. So this is going to update the user information. So this method is going to take in a build context. And then we need a file for the image. That is the user image. And then we also need a username. So let's import the file. And then it's going to be an asynchronous method, right? And then what we are just going to do is we need to get the Firebase auth instance, right? Initialize the Firebase auth instance, and then we get like the user from Firebase auth, right? And then we also need the user ID from there. Let's get the user ID, right? Let's get the user ID. And then the other thing that we need is now we need the image response, right? So the image response is going to be await. We are going to just await. We are going to await the storage repository dot, and then we use the store file. And then for the path, we are just going to change the path to /profile image, right? And then for the ID now, the ID we are going to set it to user ID, right? That's the user ID. And then the file we are just going to set it to image, right? Like this. Now, so since we are done now, we can then use image.forward, right? Image response.forward. So you only use this forward. We only use this forward if our method is of type future either, right? So we use this forward, which gives us to handle the left, the error side, and also to handle like the success side, right? So here we're just going to call it L. And then if we have an error, what we just need to do is we just need to display a snack bar with a message, right? We just need to display a snack bar with the error message. So let's copy that snack bar above, and then let's paste it. And then if on the right side, if we get like a success, right, what we're just going to do is R. And then let's create a method here, and then let's set the user to be equal to the user model. The UID is going to be the user ID, the username is we are going to set it to our username, right? And then now the profile image. The profile image is equals to ara.toString. Why did I say ara.toString, right? So if we go back inside our storage repository, you can see that on the right side, we say that if we get like success on the right side, we are just going to get the download URL, right? The download URL. So this download URL gives us like, fetches is the URL of the object that is uploaded in our cloud storage, right? So this is why we got it, ara.toString, right? So this is the download URL, right? ara.toString, which is our what? Our download URL, right? And then I'm just going to say final response, which is equal to auth repository. We need auth repository dot update user, right? So if update user, we are just going to pass in this user object right there, right? So now that's it now with what? With updating the user, right? So now we are done with our controller, but we need to create now is we need to create the auth controller provider, right? So the auth controller provider. The auth controller provider is equals to async notifier provider, right? Async notifier provider, which is of type auth controller, in the pass auth controller, and then also async value of type void, async value void, like this, right? And then it will just need to return the auth controller dot new, right? Like this, auth controller dot new. So let's remove this brackets, right? So now we need to use like to get the user data, we have to use get user data provider. So as you can see, the get user data method is a stream, right? So we need to use like a stream provider. So a stream provider is just a provider that provides like streams to our widget, right? So it's going to be stream provider. Stream provider, right? Stream provider, which is of type user model. Type user model, which can be nullable also, which can of type user model, and then pass in the reference object here, and then we need to say final auth controller, right? Auth controller is equals to reference.watch. Now we need to watch auth controller provider dot notifier, right? Like this, and then controller dot provider. So one thing that we made a mistake is we're not supposed to use the user model. We're supposed to use dot family, and then string of user ID, right? Like this, dot get, and then user ID, right? We pass in the user ID, right? Now we just need to return so this is supposed to be user, right? So now we just need to return the user, like this, right? So that's it for our get user data provider, right? So now we are done with the auth controller. Now we need to move on to the So now we are moving on to the user interface, right? So if we go into our folder, right, we have the controller and then we have the screen, right? So inside the screen folder, you need to create the login screen .dat file. So this is going to be a stateful widget. It's going to be login screen. And then also we have like the sign up screen. Sign up screen.dat file. It's also going to be a stateful widget, right? Okay. So now one thing that we need to take care of is we are going to be using text fields, right? So we need to create a custom text field so that we do not keep on creating that text field in each and every user interface that we are going to be creating, right? So what I'm just going to do is that inside utils, I'm just going to create a file called widgets. So in that widget, I'm just going to create another file called custom text field, custom text field .dat file, right? Like this, right? So it's going to be a stateless widget. And then I'm just going to call it custom text field, right? And then what do we need, right? So the first thing that we are going to need like an icon data. So icon data, which is of nullable, it's going to be prefix icon. And then we also need another icon data, which is going to be suffix icon. And then we also need a string, which is going to be the label text. And then we also need a string, which is going to be the hint. So it's going to be hint text. And then a boolean. So the boolean, we are going to use it to obscure text, right? Obscure text. And then we also need another function which is going to be type void callback, right? Void callback. So it's going to be on pressed suffix icon. And then we also need another one which is going to be value changed. Value change function, which is of type string. Then it's going to be unchanged. We're going to name it unchanged. Okay, so let's make sure that we add these things in our constructor, right? So the other thing that we forgot is the text editing controller, right? Text editing controller, which is going to be controller, right? So let's just copy this. Let's copy this. Then let's just say required this dot, and then let's paste it. Sorry, it's supposed to be this dot controller, right? What else do we need? So remove the constant since our values are dynamic, then constant. We also require the suffix icon, this dot suffix icon. We also require the prefix icon. I'll also require the label text. I'll also require the hint text. And then also require the on-pressed suffix icon. Right, and then we also require the obscure text, and then the last one is going to be the unchanged. Okay, now that we are gone, right, so inside our widget, the on build, right, we are just going to return the text form field, and then controller, and then which is going to be controller, and then obscure text, right? So obscure text, we just make sure that we put obscure text, or else it's going to be just false, right, if this value doesn't exist, right? And then unchanged, we just set it to our value changed, which we created above, right? And then now we need the decoration, so it's going to be an input decoration, right? It's going to be an input decoration. The label text, let's just make sure it's equal to the label text. And then we also need the hint text. Let's set it to the hint text, right? And then the prefix icon. Now we also need a prefix icon. So with the prefix icon, we are not going to check if it's not equal to null, then we want to set the icon to be equal to our icon data, right? Else we'll just set it to null, right? So icon data, it's supposed to be suffix icon. So this one, it's the prefix icon, it's supposed to be prefix icon, I'm sorry. Prefix icon, like this, right? And then we just check if the prefix icon is not equal to null, right? If it's not equal to null, we'll set it to prefix icon. If it's equal to null, we just set it to null. The same with our suffix icon, right? The suffix icon, we are just going to check if that suffix icon is not equal to null. If it's not equal to null, then we are going to set it to suffix icon. Otherwise, we are just going to set it to null, right? Otherwise, sorry, we'll set it to the icon button, right? We'll set it to the icon button, and then on pressed, we'll make sure that on pressed is equal to on pressed suffix icon. And then the last thing now is the icon. We'll make sure that it's equal to our icon, which is a suffix icon, like this, right? And then we must also give our text fields content padding, right? So the content padding is going to be constant agent sets dot all, and then we'll just give it like 25, right? The spacing between them. And then we need a border. So the border is going to be outline input border, and then border radius, and then the border radius is going to be border radius dot circular. We just give it a border radius of 50, and then for the border side now it's going to be border side dot null, border side dot null, and then we just make sure that field is going to be true, and then we want the fill color, right? The fill color, we want it to be white, and then also the focus border. Okay, so the focus border, we want it to be the outline input border. Want the border radius to be also 50. And then the border side, it should be none. It should be none. Okay. So now we are done with our text form field, right? We are done with our text form field. Now what we are going to do right now is we are beginning to work on our login screen, right? So let's go into our sign-in screen, into our login screen, and let's start working, right? Sign-in screen, right? So the first thing that we need is a global key. So this global key is used to track the state of our form. So when dealing with user entering login details, we are using a form, right? Text form field. So we use the global key to track the form state, right? As you can see, it's of type form state, right? So we are going to, and then now the next thing is we need a text editing controller for the email, right? Text editing controller for the email, which is equal to text editing controller, right? So we also need a text editing controller for the password. So I'm just going to copy this, and then I'm just going to paste it below, right? Password. Right, now we also need to dispose these controllers once they are used. So to dispose them, we have to use the dispose method right here, right? So if you don't, you will get an error, email.dispose. Email.dispose, right? And also the password .dispose. So we dispose them once they are no longer in use, right? So right, as you know, we wrapped our main .dat file with the provider scope. So now we want to use riverpod to consume our auth controller, right? To do so in a stateful widget, you just have to grab this with the consumer state, right? You just need to change this state to consumer state, right? To consumer state, and then you just make sure that you change it to consumer stateful widget, right? So now we are telling our widget class that we want to consume riverpod. Now we can consume riverpod in our login screen, right? So now what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to create a method called sign in with email and password. Sign in with email and password. It's going to take in a build context. And then it's going to also take in a string of type email, and then another string of type password, right? And then what we are going to do is we are going to use reference.read, and then we want to read the auth controller provider.notifier, right? Auth controller provider.notifier .sign in with email and password, right? And then this is the method that we had in our auth controller. If you still remember, this is the method, sign in with email and password, right? So now that we have done that, we can then move into our build function. Want this to be a scaffold, right? And then we need an app bar and then an app bar, right? And then I'm just going to make sure that the elevation is going to be 0, and then the background color. We have our colors in our we should create these colors, right? So if I pull out my Figma, I'll show you the design for the application, right? So this is the design for our application in Figma, right? As you can see, this is the design for our application in Figma, as you can see right here, right? This is our design in Figma. So we have this background color here, which I'm just going to import inside our application, right? So I've just downloaded this icon. I'll just put it in the description, right? I'll put it in the GitHub. You'll find it in the GitHub, right? So I'm just going to copy this, and then into our file, inside our root project file, right? Root project. We create the assets folder, Then inside the assets folder, we want to create another folder, the logo, right? So now we can open this in Finder. If you are using Windows, you can open it in Windows Explorer, right? Like this. Okay. So now for our background color, what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to copy the class for the background color, right? So inside our utils folder, let's create a file called color.dat. So I'm just going to paste it in here. So this is going to be our primary color, and then this is going to be like the orange theme that you'll be seeing inside the application, right? So this orange theme right here. So this is going to be the orange color that you'll be seeing inside the application, right? So now if we go back, so for our background color, I'm going to say app color dot primary color, right? We want it to be the primary color, right? Now let's move on to the scaffold, right? For the scaffold also, the background color also is supposed to be app color dot primary color. To primary color like this. Okay. So now for the body, we need to wrap it with a safe egg, and then a single child score view, right? Single child score view. And then the children for the single child score view, it's going to be a form, right? A form, and then this form is going to have a key. Then the key is going to be the form key that we created, right? And then for the child of this form, it's going to be a column, right? A column. And then we need a spacing between the top part. So I'm just going to use a size box to create a spacing from the top. And then the size of this size box is going to be 32, right? Like this. So let's remove this constant. Right, I made a mistake. So a column is going to have like multiple children. So we need to have like a children, right? Let's have this with a constant, right? So now what we need to take care of, we need to take care of our assets folder that we just created there, this asset folder. So if you go into your pubspec.yaml file, right, go into your pubspec.yaml file, just make sure that you uncomment these assets right here, uncomment it. And then what we are going to do is we are going to say assets / logo and then / like this. So let's remove this like this, right? Like this, right? And then let's try to load it. Right, as you can see, it's saying the directory doesn't exist. So let's check assets logo, but it exists. I don't know why it's telling us that the directory doesn't exist when it exists. So it's assets. Okay, so we made a mistake. We created inside the lib folder. It's not supposed to be inside the lib folder, right? So let's just cut it, and then let's just paste it inside our root folder, right? Right, now we are here, assets logo, right? So let's load, let's see if yeah, now you can see now that error doesn't appear anymore. So let's go back to our login screen, and then what we have to do is we need to display a logo. So if you can see from our Figma here, we need to display this logo right here, right here. So this logo, as you can see, it's at the center. So let's create a center child. It's going to be image.asset, and then it's going to be assets / logo, and then let's check what did we name our item. It's going to be cooking.png. Okay, so now we need to give it a height of 143, and then also we need to give it a width of 143, right? Height of 143 and the width of 143, right? And then after that, what we need is we need to create a text, and then we are going to call it welcome back. The text is going to be welcome back. Right, text is going to be welcome back, and then let's style it. And then font size 15, and then font weight. Make sure that the font weight is 700. W700, right, like this, right? So now that we are done, let's create another one, another text field, right? Which we just call it get the best local food in your area. Local food on the comfort of your home. And then let's also give it like a text style. And then let's just make sure that the font size is equal to 15. right? The font size is got to 15, and then let's give it some padding, right? Let's give it some padding. Let's wrap it with a padding widget like this, constant, right? Now the next one now is, after this we need a size box, a height, right? So we use like the size box to get like spacing between widgets, right? And then this one we are going to have, it's going to be a custom, the custom text field that we created, custom text field, right? It takes in the controller, which is our email controller, and then now suffix icon, right? So let's go back to our custom text field, right? Custom text field, right? If we go back to our custom text field, I made a mistake. So if we go inside our utils, widgets, the custom text field, right? The only required thing that we need here is the controller. All of those, all these other ones, they are not required, right? We only require the controller. So let's get rid of this required, right? So let's just make sure that we close our classes, and then let's go back to our login screen, right? So it's custom text field. This custom text field is going to take in the email, right? It's going to take in what? The email. It's going to take in the email, and then we need the hint text. And then the hint text is enter your email. Enter your email, right? And then after this, we also need another space between these widgets. And the height is 32. And then let's use another custom text field, right? And then in this case we have the password, right? So our controller, and then the hint is going to be enter password. Enter your password. And then we need a text field. We're just going to wrap it with the center widget, right? So you can see from our Figma, we have this forgot password. It's at the center, right? That's why I wrapped it to the center widget, right? So it's going to be forgot password, right? And then style, let's give it a text style. So in this case, our text style, we give it a colors black. And then font size is 15. And then font weight. Give it a font weight to bold. Right, let's make sure that we wrap it with a constant, right? And then we also need a spacing. And then the height is going to be 15. And then as you can see from this, we have this button right here. So let's take care of it. So this button, to give it a height, we'll wrap it inside like size box. So we give it a width of 343 and then a height of 63. a height of 63, and then child is going to be elevated button, and then on pressed we'll just leave it like that. Then here we need to take care of the text. So the text is going to be login. Let's take care of the style. Color. Make sure that there's a color of white. Right, and then font size. Font size of 15. And then font weight. And then the other thing is we need to style our button, right? We need to style our button. So we just have to put a style. So the style is going to be elevated button dot style from, right? Dot style from, and then we need to take care of the background color. This goes to colors dot black. And then we will give it like a shape. The shape is going to be rounded rectangular border, right? Rounded rectangular border. And then border radius is going to be border radius just circular. Make sure that it's 20, like this, right? Now, after this, we have to give it like a size box, right? Want the spacing, then let's give it a height of 10. As you can see from our Figma design, right? From our Figma design, we have this no account register, right? So to achieve that, what we are going to do is we are going to use like a rich text. So rich text, which text in the text is going to be a text span, right? And then for the text span, the first text we are going is going to be no account, and then question mark, right? And then we'll style it text style, and then font size 15, and then colors dot gray. $600, right? And then font weight, and then I'll just give a font weight dot W400, like this, right? So now with this rich text, it takes in like children, like, so we need the children. The other children that we need is going to be also, let's just copy this text right here, this text button right here. Let's just copy it. So let's copy this text span right here, copy. Let's paste it inside. Okay, so I think we need another, yeah. And then let's change this to account register. So let's just change this to register. Let's remove this exclamation mark, and then let's make sure that this color is goes to orange, like this, right? And then let's just make sure we wrap it with a constant, right? And then make sure that we put the exclamation mark. Now let's take care of the on pressed button on our login, right? So on text, we are going to use sign in with email and password, and then we are just going to pass in the email text controller.text, right? Email.text, and then the password.text, like this, right? Right, now that we are done, we need to take care of our rich text that we created, this rich text, because we want that if the user clicks on this rich text, if we go back to our Figma, we want that if the user clicks this, we want them to open the sign up screen, right? So we'll just repeat with the gesture detector, and then on the on tab, what we are going to do is we are just going to open this navigator to push, right? And then for the route, what we need is the material page route, and then builder, and then context, and then we'll just open this sign up screen. Like this. Now that we are done with this, what we are just going to do is most of the things that we have here, if we go to our register, and then we have enter username, right? Enter username. What we are just going to do is we are just going basically to copy this item here. Let's copy this scaffold, this whole scaffold, right? Let's copy this, copy it, and then let's go into our sign up screen. So in the return, we just paste that scaffold. Then we have to take care of, so here we'll change this to already have an account, and then login. Already have an account, then sign in, and then we change this to the login screen, so that it will direct the user to the login screen, right? The login screen, like this, right? And then now we need to, let's import this, and then we need to take care of a few things here. So what we need here is, now we need let's import the app color, and then we need the text. So let's just call it final email. This goes to text editing controller. Let's copy it also. For the username, and also the password. And also the password, right? And then we need to dispose them once they are no longer in use. So to dispose them, we just email.dispose. Okay, so now we are done with it. We also need to change this to consumer state for widget, because we are going to be consuming riverpod providers, and then we change the state to consumer state, and then let's change it to consumer state, right? And then let's import that. And then now what we need here is we need to change this. We need to create a method, sign up with email and password. This one is going to take in build context, and then email, username, that's going to take in the password, okay, and then there's ref.read auth controller provider.notifier, and then dot sign up with email and password, right? So you can see like this. And then the other thing that we forgot is the key, the global key, right? So final global key, which is going to form key. Let's go to global key, and then of type form state. It's supposed to be global caps lock key, right, like this. So it seems as if we still have an error, so it should be sign up. Sign up. It should be sign up with email and password, right? 3 positional arguments. Let's see, what else do we need? Okay, I forgot the username. Username.text, right, like this, right? Now sign in, and then let's change this text to register, right? So now we are done with we are not yet done with this. So here we also need another custom text field, and then it's going to, we are going to pass in the username, and then int is going to be enter username. And then after that, let's make sure that there is a space. Height 32, like this, right? Now that we are done with this, now the other thing that now we need to take care of, is state persistence. So what is state persistence? So state persistence is like we are going to check if the user is logged in or not. If the user is logged in, then we are just going to redirect them to the home screen. So let's create a folder called router.dat, right? So here we are going to say final logged in route, right? It's goes to route map. So this uses the route master package, right? And then for the routes, what we are going to do is I'm just going to use like the backslash, and then we are going to redirect to our material page. And then so to use the material page, you must import the material.dat, right? And then the child of the material page is going to be main screen. So it's going to be main screen, right? So let's make sure that we create the main screen. So inside our features, we need to create a main, and then inside the main we create screen. That inside the screen we create the main screen.dat. And then it's going to be a stateless widget, and then main screen. like this. So if we go back to our router.dat, let's just import the main screen. So I'm just going to also copy it. Oh, sorry, I made a mistake. It's supposed to be copy. And then the other route that we have is the logged out route, right? So inside the logged out route, we want to redirect the user to the sign-in screen. So if they are logged out, we want to show them the sign-in screen, right? The logged in screen, right? Login screen, right? So now that we have taken care of this router.dat package, now we need to go and work on the main.dat file, right? So as you can see, we have the material up. We just need to make like a few modifications, right? So here I'm just going to delete this. I'm just going to delete that, and then what I'm just going to do here is I'm just also going to delete this my app, right? You can see this my app. So I want to change it to a stateful widget, and then let's name it my app. And then we want also to consume riverpod provider. So we change the state to consumer state, and then the stateful widget to consumer stateful widget. Right, like this, right? So now what we need here is we need to initialize the user model. Right, so we're going to say user model, like this, right? And then we'll create a function for getting the user data, right? So this function is going to be get data. This function is going to take in the widget reference. So the widget reference is the riverpod. Is a riverpod widget that allows us like to be able to get references of providers, right? And then just going to pass in user and then the data, right? That's the things that we need, right? It's going to be an async function. So we need this user. So this user is going to come from Firebase. So let's import Firebase. Or you can see it's going to come from Firebase. So now we are going to set our user model, initialize our user model that we created here. We are going to set it to await reference dot watch, and then we are going to watch the auth provider controller dot notifier, and then get user data, and then for the UID we are going to pass in data.uid, right? Since the data you can see is of type user, so a type of user is a user ID, right? And then dot first, right, like this. And then we also need to create another provider, which is user provider dot notifier. So we are going to update it, right? We are going to update it to what? To our user model. We are going to update it to our user model. Our user model now that contains what? Our user ID, right? So if you still remember, inside our auth controller, we created this user provider here, which was initialized to now. But now in our main.dat file, we are setting that to the user model, which contains the user ID, right? So each and every user contains like a unique user ID, right? And then here what we are going to do, we are going to return reference.watch. So we are going to watch the auth state So I think we forgot to create the auth state change provider, right? So let's go inside our auth controller. So let's go inside our auth controller. So if we go inside our auth controller, let's create an auth, sorry. So let's create a final auth state change provider. Auth state change provider, right? Which is going to be of type stream. Because if you remember, we say that the auth state change, if we go into our auth repository, let's go inside our auth repository. Our auth state change is of type stream, so we are going to need a stream provider, right? Stream provider. Stream provider, and then we're taking the reference, and then we need the auth controller. Auth controller, right? Auth controller. Auth controller is goes to reference.watch, right? Auth controller provider dot notify, right? Auth controller provider dot notify, and then we are just going to return auth controller dot auth state change. So we made a mistake. So let's go back into our auth repository. Let's copy this auth state change provider here. Let's copy it. Let's go inside our auth controller. So inside our auth controller, let's paste it above, right? And then it's supposed to be, so here let's change this to auth repository. It's supposed to be auth. Let's change this to auth repository dot auth state change, like this, right? So let's get it dot auth state change, right, like this. So now if we go back into our main.dat file, auth state change provider, right? Auth state change provider, and then dot when. So riverpod, when you use the when method, it gives us like 3 states, right? It gives us the state whereby we have the data, right? And then it gives us a state where we have an error, right? If we have an error, and then it gives us a state whereby our data is still loading. Let's say if we are getting the data from an API, in this case Firebase, if data is still loading, it will allow us to handle that, right? So what we want to do first is that when there is data, right, what we want to do is we want to say material app dot router. So we need this dot router method because we are using route master package, right? And then the color, we just say app color dot primary color, right? That's the color that we want. And then debug show check, we're going to false. We don't want to show the debug. And then we need the router delegate, right? The router delegate, which is going to take care of our routers. So the router delegate, we're going to pass in the route master delegate, right? The route master delegate takes in a route builder. Then for route builder, we need a context, right? It needs a context, right? And then that context, what we are going to do is we are just going to check if our data is not equal to null, right? So we are going to check if the data is not equal to null. So this means that if the user, right, you can see data is of type user. If the user is not equal to null, right? If the user is not equal to null, now what we want to do is get data, right? And then we'll just set in the get data method that we have here. We're going to set that data, the user's data, we're going to set it and then provide the reference, right? And then the next thing that we're going to do, we will just return a logged in route. If you remember from our router.dat, right? If we go inside our router.dat, the logged in route will redirect her to the main screen, right? And then else that means that the user is not logged in. We'll just return what? We'll just return a logged out route, right? A logged out route. Just redirect the user to the sign-in screen, right? So now we need to take care of this. So take care of this. Let's go inside our widgets folder, right? Inside our widgets folder. So let's go inside our utils folder, widgets folder. Let's create an error.txt file. Error text.dat. It's going to be a stateless widget, then it's going to be error text. So it's going to take in a string of type error, and then it's going to we will require that thing, require this dot error. It's supposed to be error, and then here we'll just display the center text or center child, and then text. This text is going to display the error. Okay, so that's it for the error part, right? And then we also need a loader to handle loading data, right? Loader.dat. Okay, it's going also to be a stateless widget. So it's going to be loader. And then here we need to return a center widget. Child is going to be a circular progress indicator. Right. So let's make sure we just repeat with the constant. Okay, so now we're done. Here we just need the error text. And then error.toString, and then for the loader we just need, for the loading we just need the loader, like this. Okay, so now that now that our emulator is running, so one thing that we did is we forgot to pass in the route information, right? The route information parser. Then this route information parser is going to come from route master, right? So it's going to come from route master parser, right? And then, right, if we reload our emulator, you'll see that this is our application here, right? This is our application right here. So let's reload it again. This is our application. So let's go to register. And then let me just type in my email. And then the username. And then let's type in the password. And then let's register, right? And then we are getting this problem. As you can see now, we are now at the main screen. So you saw that error that appeared that we are passing a null value. So it's because the null value that we passed was username, which we didn't put inside our auth controller, right? But as you can see, the application is running. So in the next video, we are going to be working on the home screen, right? Then we work on getting the categories and also getting the main. Thanks for watching, guys. Cheers.